Hello and welcome to Mark's Woodworking Challenges. I'm Mark, your host, and today we have once again a hand plane challenge. Now if you've watched my channel, you will know that for every hand plane video that I've done has been either about metal planes or transitional planes. There is, however, a completely different category of planes that I have not covered, and that is wooden planes. And in fact, wooden planes, of course, predate either the transitional or metal planes, and so it's high time we gave at least some attention to the category. Now, one reason I have not covered wooden planes yet is that they are a smaller component of my hand plane arsenal. I'm only including ones that were once available commercially, perhaps many years ago, but nonetheless commercially. I'm excluding homemade wooden planes and Japanese wooden planes. Here are the 4 wooden planes that we're going to cover today. Before we go any further, I should give a definition of a wooden plane. I think it's relatively obvious, but we should state it nonetheless. A wooden plane is obviously, maybe, a plane made entirely of wood for the body. The wedge, the cutter will be held in by a wedge, which is also made of wood. The only metal will be the cutter and the chip breaker fastened to the cutter. So that's a wooden plane, and they were in existence long before either transitional planes or metal planes. Now the 4 that I own are a Randall and Cook 26-inch long joiner plane, an Auburn Manufacturing Company 24-inch joiner plane, a Scioto Works razee jack plane, 16 inches long if I remember correctly, and a Ogontz Coffin smoother. Now on the next, just to make things a little more efficient, on the next slide I sort of have a summary table with the details of each of these 4 planes, in the plane, who made the plane, who made the cutter, how long was it, and how much did it weigh. In lieu of taking each plane apart, what I wanted to do was provide a brief description of each plane, and in particular, one thing that I'm going to do a little different is what I've done is I've taken a picture of the maker's mark and the stamp of the cutter, because doing those on a live video it makes them almost impossible to see. So what I've done is I've taken the best picture that I could in hopes that you can actually see both of those items for each plane. Now to start off with, we have the Ogontz Coffin smoother. Now Ogontz was sort of the second tier brand of Sandusky manufacturing company, Sandusky Tool Company I should say. And you can see there basically the maker's mark on the front of the plane is somewhat visible. The plane, the cutter is stamped with Sandusky Tool Company, which makes me feel that probably that cutter is original to that plane body, since they are both products of the Sandusky company. The Coffin smoother is a very common type of smoothing plane, basically called a coffin smoother because it's in the shape of a coffin. What can I say? And this one is 8 inches long and weighs a whopping 2 1/8 pounds. Next up is the Scioto Works razee jack plane. Again, Scioto Works is the second tier brand of the Ohio Tool Company. You can see in the upper left corner the maker's mark, Scioto Works. Hopefully you can see it. In the lower right hand corner you can see the stamp on the cutter, which is Ohio Tool Company, with some other letters, high grade steel, Auburn, etc. It's not all legible, so what you see is what I'm seeing. The razee jack is 16 inches long and weighs 3 1/4 pounds. And in this particular case was sort of a basket case when I got it. Someone had driven a rod, the tote was loose, they had driven a nail crosswise through the body, and so there's a fair amount of repair work done to this, and I basically re-glued the tote back on in a more proper fashion, but there was significant collateral damage. So this is not only is it not really a collectible plane when it was new, but it's not even less of a collectible plane now. Next up is an Auburn Joiner. Now this one is a little interesting because this plane was actually given to me by my paternal grandfather. And so the first thought in your mind is, well, what an heirloom. Well, that's maybe accurate. So Grandpa, he was a metal worker and welder par excellence, and as near as I can tell, well, in fact what I know is he had a grand total of 3 woodworking tools. This plane, a level, and a chisel, if I remember correctly. And so and it was pretty clear that none of these 3 tools had ever been seriously used. So as an heirloom goes, yeah, not so much. Furthermore, when it came to me, it had no cutter. So basically I had to steal a cutter from another plane to put in it. And in fact, it's a little bit of an odd width on the throat, and so I had to take a wider cutter and grind it down a little bit. So there you have it. It's it's nice that it came from my grandpa, but yeah, it's nice. I'm going to keep it. What the heck? And so the only other thing I can say is I could make out the maker's mark on the front. I know it's an Auburn product, but it just could not be photographed. So, and lastly, the only other interesting tidbit is that some Auburn products were made using prison labor. I have no idea if this plane falls into that category, but take that for what it's worth. The last of the 4 then is the Randall and Cook Joiner. Now you can see Randall and Cook is pretty clearly legible there on the top left. It had a W Butcher brand cutter in it, which is I think quite a relatively popular cutter to be had back in the 1800s. Mr. Butcher and Company, I think, manufactured a tremendous number of these things and sold them to plane makers like Auburn or Randall and Cook or whomever. This thing is a whopping 26 inches long, and it weighs 8 pounds, so it has got some serious heft. Now, what makes it particularly interesting to me is that according to a guide to the makers of American wooden planes, the Randall and Cook Company was only in business from 1835 to 1840. So if that's true, and if this plane really is a Randall and Cook product, which indeed the maker's mark seems identical to the one on the bottom there, then that means that this plane is a whopping 184 years old and is certainly the oldest plane that I have in my possession. Okay, so what I thought we would do next is just give a little demonstration of how to set a wooden plane, how to set and adjust the iron on a wooden plane, and hopefully you will see that it is not a terribly difficult proposition. To install and adjust the cutter on a wooden plane, basically you install the cutter, you tighten the wedge, you can tap on the back of the iron to make the cutter deeper. If you need to make the cutter retract, you can either tap on the rear of the plane or on the top of the front of the plane. Either one will work. Basically, those act by, what you're doing is forcing the wooden body of the plane to move, but inertia makes the cutter want to stay put, and so it will, if the plane's going in that direction and the cutter stays still, then the body goes that way, cutter stays still, and it becomes looser. Lateral adjustment will almost always be necessary, and in that case it's done by tapping on one side or the other of the iron. Now, this is the Randall and Cook joiner plane. I love using this plane, and you've seen it in one of my previous videos where we talked about edge joining a board, including the test board that we use here on Mark's Woodworking Challenges. I love this plane for edge joining. Maybe not so much for face joining, because it is, after all, a heavy beast and it will wear a person out. So what we're going to do is put the timer on and see how long will it take us to get a shaving off of this plane. Okay, ready, go. I usually put the plane on a flat surface, tighten the wedge. That is pretty darn close. That was almost, it might have been a little bit too lucky. Down just a little bit. I have not jointed this board lately, so let's do just a little bit more. Oops. Okay, there's a case where we're coming off just a hair too thick. So this will give a good demonstration. Not bad. Actually, that would be pretty good. So, 1:48. And so there you have it. Not too difficult. So to remove the blade, you can see that takes it out. Okay, for the sake of reproducibility, let's try this one more time. Oop. There we go. Okay, cutter and wedge are out. Now, one thing I was reminded of here today is I always like to check to make sure that the position of the cap iron relative to the edge of the cutter is where I left it. Sometimes when the wedge is going in, it will push your cap iron out of adjustment and cause you problems. So I just like to check it and make sure it's where I want it. Now we put it in. I like to start with the plane on a level surface, feel right where it contacts the surface, put it there. Alright, I should hit the start button. So we haven't done anything yet, so hit the start button. There we go. Feel for the bottom. Hold it there. Insert the wedge. Try it out. Board is not very well jointed, but it is pretty close. In fact, let's just frankly, I wouldn't want it very different from that. 45 seconds. Let's just keep doing it for a bit just to prove the point. Voila. Alrighty then. What have we learned? First of all, we've learned that it is really not very difficult to use a wooden plane. You can see that it took me under 2 minutes on 2 different occasions to start from scratch and end up with a shaving. It's easy enough to retract the blade. I mean, you saw the whole process. One thing I forgot to mention, or should mention now, is you'll need a decent plane hammer. This is actually not my regular plane hammer. My regular plane hammer is at my other shop. But this is a pretty good one. I'm going to keep it and use it as such because what you need is kind of not a super lightweight hammer, not a super heavyweight hammer. This is a pretty light hammer, but it's got just the right amount of momentum to move the blade around and retract the blade when you need it. The other thing I should mention is that, as always, it makes a world of difference if you've sharpen the blade well. I mean, that is a necessary prerequisite for using any plane, and it's certainly especially true of wooden planes. One thing I was also going to mention is that even if they're not in perfect shape, or if they're not from a premium manufacturer, they can still be perfectly usable. As you can see, two of these planes, although we didn't actually take shavings with them, two of these planes are from second-tier manufacturers. This are the second-tier product line of a major manufacturer. That would be the Scioto Works and the Ogontz. They still work well. I wasn't going to use the Scioto Works one today because I've got it set up to be a scrub plane, which will be a subject of a future video. I also mentioned that this Scioto Works plane has had some serious abuse in its lifetime from someone who did a extremely poor repair of the tote, yet it still works fine. The Ogontz still is, also has a little bit of a crack here on the cheek. Doesn't affect performance. And in fact, the Auburn had no blade whatsoever. So it adopted a blade from the pile, so to speak. So they don't have to be from Clark and Williams to work. And you don't have to, in fact, you don't have to spend very much money for these things. So my word to you is, go ahead and give it a try. You might find that you really enjoy using a wooden plane. The Randall and Cook Joiner is just about my favorite plane for edge joining. I just love the way it feels. It's like a battleship running down that edge, and you just have to sort of keep it steered in the right direction and it'll do the rest of the work by itself almost. So, well, you can see I like to use it. I like to use all of them. So, without further ado, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please, if you have, please consider subscribing. Hit the like button. And by all means, leave a comment. We'll see you next time on Mark's Woodworking Challenges.